Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode and we are discussing about global food and water security, which is very important even for Asia Pacific and around the world. We have our expert panelists. We have Professor David Smith from USA. We have Professor Robs from USA, and we have our friends, Mr. Aaron. So we will discuss about how we can solve this problem, or the global communities, how we can contribute for global food and water security. I want to start from Professor David. Sir, how do you want to analyze today's topic and what we can do strategically?
Well, your food and water safety is a small cornerstone when you look really in the whole cybersecurity world, physical security world, and the fact that the way they combine here is in an industry that traditionally has not been driven by technology. So if you would think of the power grid, which is still lagging behind many industries, it is a lot more secure than your water and your food industry. But yet we've seen examples in the past where they're very vulnerable, both to attacks that bring down the infrastructure that helps support them and to physical attacks too. It was not that many years ago that one of the reservoirs in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., had chemicals deposited into it that rendered that reservoir unusable. But I can tell you on firsthand experience how vulnerable the infrastructure is. We recently had 100-year snowstorm here in Austin, where I live, and it knocked out all of our water plants for over a week. And you would not believe what it's like to have to get by without any running water. And for Texas, where we're more likely to have 100-degree weather than below freezing, around zero weather for over a week, melting snow to use in the house is a very different feeling for us. But the food network and the water network is really most likely forgotten by most people when you look at how to secure it from both an internet, electronic situation, and even physical security, because that's becoming increasingly important, particularly in the distribution of food.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Aaron, how do you want to analyze today's topic and what kind of problem you are observing, especially global food and water securities in North America? Can you unmute, please?
You're muted.
Yes, I'm also here from Texas. It was a little unnerving seeing some of the results of that just a freak storm can have on our grid. As far as security of food supplies goes, I interpret it more as availability. And one of the things that I believe is going to help individuals have more security in the food and water supplies is a move more towards decentralization and a household level production and collection of water and food. That being said, when you look at this sector, there's a stunning deficit of technologies that are going to help in this. Like, for instance, one of the things that I saw is a basic hydroponic setup that's all controlled through Arduino boards that grows, plants in the water in places where you don't have arable soil. They're even able to harvest themselves at a certain level, and seeing systems like this is going to help improve the quality of life, not only here, and food availability, not only here, but in developing countries around the world, as well as rainwater collection systems and, integrating them from the individual level to the large scale level, I think is going to see a lot more food security, because it'll be grown, door to door more so than way off over here at this larger farm. I think this is going to benefit, everybody.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Rob, how do you want to analyze and how you want to solve this problem? Like, we need some sort of solutions for this kind of problem through technology. Yes.
Well, yeah, I think we need to just make sure it's a priority. When you're talking about water, you've got a couple things going on. One is you've got a rather substantial amount of water waste by a number of industries that are consuming and polluting the water. Petrochemical is probably the most problematic, but lithium-ion mining also does pretty ugly things to the environment if it's not done properly. And then, of course, with regard to food, the major impact is climate change, and that's resulting in large areas that used to be farming areas becoming unavailable to farming and food production. Depending on where you're talking about farming, there actually has been quite a bit of technology applied to it. Some of the more advanced robotic efforts now are focused on farming and farming tractors. But perhaps the most promising is the development of these factory farms where they build the farm in high rises and contain the overall effort. Production per square foot goes up dramatically. Ability to control quality goes up dramatically, and pest control without using pesticides, which has an adverse impact on water in terms of runoff into water supplies, is mitigated, because if the area is contained, you can do a much better job of keeping insects out as opposed to having to poison them once they're there. With regular farms, some of the technology that's advanced is the ability to use alternative forms of weed control, where the device senses the weeds and applies the pesticide surgically on the weed itself, so you don't have as much waste, as much overrun. And there have been efforts to apply other technologies to remove weeds that don't use pesticides at all. And all of those things can help. But my belief is that, at least in emerging countries, and particularly countries that are facing climate change, it may be better to move to some type of agricultural containment, so you can protect the agriculture from the weather, get yields up, put the production closer to the population, so you don't have as much transport cost and transport delays. And then, of course, one of the other things with regard to food is fixing our tendency to throw out massive amounts of food waste that could be reused, recycled, or remains viable because the sell-by date stuff is way too aggressive in some categories. So reduce waste, reduce pesticide, and protect the sources of the food and water, because if you don't have food and water, you don't have much of a country. You're going to have serious problems doing pretty much anything else if you can't feed and provide water to your population.
Thank you, Professor Paul. How do you want to analyze this problem, and if you figure out some statistical informations for Asia Pacific for these sessions, or if you want to share some information, what will happen next few years? Can you unmute? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some huge problems with the rising temperatures. I mean, we're reaching thresholds where the temperature is high enough that the photosynthesis process within plants is severely reduced. So most plants are so-called C3 plants, which C3 refers to the photosynthetic pathway that the plants use to convert the CO2 and water and sunlight into developing the plant matter. And that process, of course, all plants respire at night, right? It's only during the day when the photosynthesis occurs. And as temperature rises, the respiration at night increases significantly. And during the day, with higher temperatures, the photosynthesis process is severely affected. So it's a nonlinear process of photosynthesis. It rises, it peaks, and then it decreases. So for C3 plants, we're already very close to these thresholds where further increases in temperature reduce the amount of photosynthesis that goes on in all plants, not just in crop plants. And there are other plants that use a so-called C4 pathway, and these include grasses and corn, for example. And that curve peaks the photosynthesis peaks at a higher temperature at 28 degrees Celsius versus 18 degrees Celsius for the C3 plants. So basically, as we continue to further increase temperature, then we're going to get less and less yield from plants. And on an overall climate point of view, that reduces the terrestrial plants will actually flip from being a net carbon source to a net carbon sink rather to a net carbon source with under business as usual within about 20 years. So by 2050. So at that, as the sinks fail on the surface of the Earth, then the CO2 level will increase more and more quickly in the atmosphere. Okay, so we have a huge, problem with the entire climate system, and it's coming up very, very quickly. So, just want to say that we have to address the root causes of climate change, climate system change. And that's not just slashing fossil fuel emissions, but also looking at ways to remove, not looking at, but deploying methods to remove carbon dioxide and other carbon methane from the atmosphere. And, also to seriously look at methods to cool the planet so that we have time to remove CO2 and to slash fossil fuel emissions. So, we've run out of time, basically, to do these things. And, there's way too much talk on what we should do and not enough being done in terms of action. So just want to say, time's up, basically.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. James, how do you want to analyze the problem? And specifically, I want to get some feedback from Africa as your foundation working with African communities. So what's going on in terms of food and water securities in Africa?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Sharif. As always, I admire what your guests have said already. I think that, not just specific to Africa, because I think of this as a global problem. But, as Rob said earlier, if you don't have food, you don't have water, what can you do? Because water is life. And, I look at it at a micro and macro level, because you talked about some of the possible solutions, but at the micro level, you change yourself, change your behaviors. If you think this problem is too big and nothing you do will matter, you're just another brick in the wall. So you've got to change your behavior. Does that mean I have to be vegan? Oh, it's too hard. I'll give up. No, maybe just, eat some lamb roast instead of beef. Change your behavior, eat more plant-based foods. Just modify your behavior just a little bit. It'll make a difference if everybody does it. So together we can help to solve some of these global problems that are affecting us all. We're all in this together. And I really wanted to say, part of the issue is also our economic systems, because capitalism, free market capitalism, is based on scarcity, not on abundance. And if water is free and abundant, then I can't charge for it. And if food is abundant, I cannot charge for it. And it goes to healthcare as well. Do I have a product to sell you that will make you well if you're sick? Well, do I want you well? No, I want you sick, so you'll buy my product. So, we have to change our perspective on a macro level too. We have to change. When our economic systems work, they're great. When they don't work in terms of healthcare and water supply, that type of thing, food, then we have to think of a different solution, a different way of approaching the problem, not just the free market capitalism approach. Take another approach. And you can do this. I call it mixed capitalism. Because competition is good by nature. There's lots of things that can be said for it. And it produces better outcomes at a cheaper cost in many ways. But when it's not appropriate to use something else that's more appropriate. So sometimes we have to think about our fellow citizens, our fellow people on this planet, and how do we get them food? How do we get them water because water is life. And we don't want it scarce so that we can charge for it. That is not the goal. But it is the goal in the free market capitalistic system. So we have to expand our brains. We have to expand this from a macro level so it affects policy. So water is abundant, food is abundant, and in ways that do not harm the planet. This is the key. We cannot continue to harm the planet because we have run out of time. Thanks again for inviting me on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our honorable chairman from Pacific Rim Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Homestoner. Hello, sir. How are you? And how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Good morning. Good morning. It is very early in the morning here in Los Angeles. So I had to come down here into the garage so I didn't wake up my family. Anyhow, we'll talk about this food issue, which is very high on my list of priorities. That I think it all boils down to, and most of these problems all boil down to one thing: population. As our population grows proportionately, particularly in the southern hemisphere, you're seeing the populations of the industrialized countries flattening out and even declining, where you see in the southern hemisphere, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, and so forth, those populations expanding rapidly. The populations in those parts of the world are much younger and much more aggressive than they are in the upper part of the world. So this being said, it's going to tax a lot of the resources, which particularly water. Water is becoming more and more and more scarce, clean water, that is, potable water. And as that happens, you're going to see social discord happening right alongside of it. I predict that you're going to start seeing conflicts between countries like Ethiopia and Egypt, like the Mekong Delta and China, where people are getting less and less water as their populations expand. And that is the way that things are going to go in the future. Water is going to become a very, very critical issue. For instance, Shanghai's Shanghai area has 36 million people living in it, and they don't have enough water for 20. Even Taiwan, because they use a lot of water to make computer chips, when they had a drought, the computer chips stopped being made. Water is the issue, I think, of more so than anything else. And I think that what human beings should start doing is start figuring out how they're going to sustain themselves in the 21st century on less water.
Thank you, sir. I want to start from Professor David, because in COVID-19 situation, we are facing a lot of challenge. So climate change is real. We have to face this climate change related problem. But my question is that when we're thinking about climate change and we are thinking about food and water securities, we are observing, especially developing nation, they will be affected soon. Example, country like Indonesia, country like Maldives, India, even Bangladesh. This kind of country they are in the risk positions. But my question is that how, even though we are observing John Kerry and his some politicians from USA, they are trying to create a collaboration, but still there are a lot more room. How we can collaborate to solve this global problem like water and food related problems, like how we can work with more research organizations, more corporation, those who have the solutions. And even though developed nations have solutions, but how we can make it more affordable for developing nation. Actually, this is the border question, but I want to go through all of our panelists. Yes. Can you unmute, please?
It's a great question. One of the ways we have worked to solve this type of really big challenge. And what you described is actually would qualify, I believe, as one of the grand challenges, because as I look at our international basis, is we begin to pull together public-private partnerships to begin to help address those, particularly ones where you have to do more than just bring in technology. We have to do more than that. You have to produce workers who can manage it, who can build it, who can support it. And that's really critical for getting this done. And public-private partnerships, the best ones for attacking problems like this, involve the government. It involves the private sector, both large companies, but don't forget the small entrepreneur companies as well, because they add tremendous innovation where the big companies add scalability to it. And you also need to bring in academia, because academia provides the human capital that can drive all of that forward together. And the solving a food issue, solving water issues is a problem that we too many times stovepipe the solutions. And it reminds me of a project that I was involved with where they went to solve some of the water problems, but then the pumping infrastructure wouldn't handle it. When you got to last mile distribution where the water needed to be used, there wasn't a last mile distribution that could help solve that problem as well. So they worked on the main part they thought in their mind was producing more water, but it didn't meet the needs because there wasn't this greater thought, this greater collaboration. And quite honestly, things like public-private partnerships help bring more focus, not in the silo, not in the stovepipe, but across the broader part of the ecosystem that you really need to work on to solve the problem with.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron. Can you unmute, please?
Yeah, sorry. As with most problems, I feel like it can be addressed with effective planning. And as we continue to develop artificial intelligences, perhaps it would help us spot some of these weak points in the distribution chain ahead of time. Now, one thing that I always notice when I drive through cities, I consider myself what you would call an off-gridder here, which focuses on self-sustainability. I don't see any of these large buildings with integrated rainwater collection. I'm not seeing any storage and filtration systems, because if you have an area with a long dry season, you have to be able to store that water effectively for long periods of time. So being able to analyze our cities and figure out how we can, collect more water, filter more water, store more water in as close to a passive solid state way as possible, that's what's going to see a lot of water resources freed up, as well as using AI to, again, manage supply chain issues. Now, and one of the things I really appreciated what Rob said about the enclosed factory vertical farming method, especially utilizing automation to help deal with some of that. You could end up with a process where everything from the sowing of the seed to the stocking of the shelf is automated. However, without collaborative efforts to develop these technologies, they'll remain simply a fantasy.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Well, when you've got a scarce resource, that's where government comes in to do what they're supposed to do and provide incentives and fines to control behavior. If government doesn't play the role, then as James pointed out, the capitalistic aspects of the market take over, and it is costly to do. Right now, it is more costly to do conservation efforts than not, because you're not being charged for the damage that you do. And so regardless of whether you're a coal mine or a water purification plant, if you're doing harm, somebody else is paying for that harm. And of course, in this case, it's the environment and our food sources. One of the interesting projects I was involved in, at least involved covering, was when we're talking about industry and solving the problem, was with Cisco in Africa, where their corporate responsibility group went in and worked with local industries to find ways to better handle clean water wells. When they first looked at the problem, they found that a lot of the small towns in Africa had no source of clean water. And they were aggressively polluting the water sources that they did have. And so putting in place a relatively inexpensive pumping and monitoring network so that the people managing the typically local citizens managing the wells could monitor the health of those wells, the quality of the water, could place the wells where they were away from polluting sources, and could keep the pumps running without having to field the tech. It was a pretty impressive deployment, and solved, at least for those small municipalities, their clean water problem. And that's one of the ways that tech companies can help. They do have corporate responsibility efforts that can go in and then apply technology with local help to do it. But there are a handful of companies that do that, and I'm not convinced that it can scale without the aggressive inclusion of government, because they're the ones that can cookie cutter a lot of these efforts. They have the people, the feet on the ground to better secure the sources once they're in place. And in a lot of cases, at least in some of the emerging economies, those governments are incredibly weak, and their ability to even defend themselves is limited. And that's a problem for all of us, because as we've seen with regard to the large migrations from Central and South America towards the United States, as people lose their source of income, as water sources and food dry up, they migrate to areas that don't yet have the problem and create other problems for those areas. And so even though it may seem like, hey, this is somebody else's problem, it's not our problem, add the word yet, because one is climate change is hitting a broader and broader swath of the world. And two, the people that are migrating from areas that are experiencing climate change are going to put a lot of stress on the resources for the areas that are not yet fully ensconced in agricultural failure, and the failure to clean and protect water sources. And so this is a world problem, but it requires a localized effort first. Solving problems worldwide has been problematic for us as a race. The Paris Climate Accords were kind of a joke because they had no enforcement, and everybody felt good when they did it, but there was no enforcement, no real penalty for not adhering to the rules. And we really can't have that. If we're going to put in place rules and regulations, people need to be held to those rules and regulations. It shouldn't be the case where the two largest economies are also the two largest polluters on the planet. And because in theory, our economies, and I'm saying the United States and China, or at least right now, lead the world in terms of pollution. If we solve our problems, a good deal of the problem in the world is going to be solved. But if China and the U.S. don't kick back, small countries in South Central America, Africa, they're not going to be able to do much because the large economies are doing just so much pollution they can't make up for it. So it really does require a world effort. But for now, your best focus is to solve your problems locally, because waiting for the world to come around is probably not going to happen. And at least if you can address your localized problems, you can stabilize your civilian population and protect your folks. And that's really the role of government. Government is supposed to protect its people. And once you lose your clean water and food, you don't have much of a country. And we're on that path for an awful lot of countries at the moment.
Thank you, sir. We have our new guest, Professor Mr. David. David, my Professor Paul, I'm coming to you. Before that, Mr. David, how do you want to analyze this problem, especially global food and water security?
Hello, everybody. Hi. Well, the thing is, water is a public good, and access to clean water as well. So that's how it should be treated as well. At least this is the thing in Europe. Of course, is what has just been announced in Germany, that we will have a lack of water. The government already urges the citizen to save water because the groundwater level is dropping. Also, and this we can see in our nature. So to secure water, first of the thing is like big thing is there is a lot of water, but most of the water is salt water. So we need desalinated water in that case. And in case of food security, of course, we have actually enough food on our planet. Yeah, there's more than enough food, but the industrial nations waste more than 1/3, or actually I think 40% of the food they produce. And this is the thing. And I think a problem which adds to it is the variety of food. Yeah, do we need bananas the whole year in our supermarket shelf? I don't know. Do we need tomatoes in winter time? Everything is possible, of course, but we need greenhouses for this, which consume a lot of energy. And this is the case. And there, I think we should be one of the leaders as the industrial nations and say we have to consume smarter and we have to consume less. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Paul.
Yeah, I think we need to use the, not just think of food and water that we can get from land activities. I think, we don't think of the oceans enough. And, there's no reason we can't set up permaculture type situations or aquaculture. And not just along coastlines, where some of there's some negative effects on the coastlines, but we need to really 70% of the planet's surface is ocean, right? And all our discussions on food and water are basically what we can do on the 30% area. And the oceans, for example, we've domesticated a dozen species or something on land and nothing in the ocean. I mean, we always just think of what we can do, on land, and we ignore the oceans. And there's lots of different ideas for, getting more food from the oceans and creating, most of the oceans is devoid of much life. If the water is too warm and there's not enough nutrients so that the phytoplankton can thrive, then that basically trickles up the entire food chain, and there's very little life in parts of the ocean. And we're missing many parts of the ocean are high nutrient but low iron, for example. And just a little bit of iron, and you get a proliferation of phytoplankton in those regions, and then you can get the zooplankton and all the way up the food chain. And obviously, the way the food chain works and the way the different trophic levels work, if we get more of our food from lower levels on the food chain, so more and more, we need to go to more and more plant-based diets. Not necessarily completely eliminate meat, but not treat it as a normal everyday food and have it less often. Then we can, get a lot more food availability. So, and also, the desalination plants were just mentioned, and there's lots of different methods for extracting fresh potable water from the oceans, to getting the salt out. A lot of processes are high energy intensive. Which is fine if you have the energy available near the coastlines to set up these plants. But there's other methods that can get potable water. And we waste tremendous amounts of, it's sort of insane when you think about some of the things that we do everywhere. And, we purify, for example, we take ocean water and we purify it in water purification plants, and then it goes to homes. And a lot of the water that we use in homes for showers and for sanitation. The water we flush down the toilet is this purified water from a water purification plant. All we need is a separate system. There's no reason not to use, seawater, in the toilets or even in the showers. That we, and just have a separate water system for drinking water and for all of the rest of the water, which doesn't have to be purified. So, it's insane that we purify water and we end up flushing it away down the toilets. So we just need to do things differently.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jamsid.
Yes, what I'm hearing is appropriate technology, and I'm a big believer in that. And but you started out talking about borders, and borders in nature are things like mountain ranges, impassable rivers, channels, things like that. But man has created borders, the borders that really do not exist in nature. And one of the proudest moments of being in the United States was when a president said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And one of the most shameful moments was when we had a president said, "Build that wall." And so, if we have water on this side of the wall, the other side of the wall, and people who don't have water are going to come for it. And that's the conflict that Stone was mentioning earlier. That's inevitable if we hoard and say, this is ours, you can't have it. When it comes to water and food, that's just not acceptable. It's inevitable that conflict will occur. We will see war over water. This is insane behavior because it's entirely predictable. So these are the things that we can address, but we have to address them in cooperation. As Sharif, this is the whole point of your show: is how do we cooperate? How do we collaborate together to solve these problems? Because there are technologies that we can use in as appropriate. Don't build a windmill where there's no wind, that sort of thing. But we also have to do this together because we're in this together. So we start with ourselves. What can I do for myself? And I learned, as I always do on your show, I have solar panels, I drive an electric car. I've done certain things about my behavior in food consumption, those types of things that I thought I was making a difference. And then Alice came on your show and he said, if you have electrical devices plugged in and unused, those are energy drains. And I looked in every room in my house. That's exactly what I had. So it was, you raise your awareness of how can I contribute just a little bit, just one person, a little bit more. And then if every person is doing a little bit more, then it starts to build into something bigger, and it starts to manifest change in our planet, in our global environment. And also I want to go back to the idea of, we have to change our policy mindset, because in the United States, I can only speak for the United States in this case, but we pro-business because they produce jobs. Well, that's true and that's good. But what we have to think of is terms of making things like basic human needs such as water and food more abundant. And so business is not always incented to do that. Business is incented to meet the quarterly report so that the shareholders are happy with them and they can charge more for their product and pay themselves more for being so smart. These are not the ways that you produce water where water is needed. These are not the way you produce food where food is needed. And yes, there are definitely problems with distribution. We could have food here, but can we get it there? These are solvable problems if we collaborate, if we work together to solve them. But first off, we have to say the problem exists, because if you state the problem accurately, it's half solved. And then all you have to do is the rest of the work. And there are bright minds out there, and some of them are on your panel, that have come up with these solutions, but they cannot get the will of the people behind it. And this means you, as a voter, have a role to play. Vote for people who are not pro-business and just capitalist, free market capitalist, anti-regulation. These are the people that are getting in the way of the solutions. So vote for people that are identified the problem. What is the problem? Scarcity of essential human needs. And are they articulating a way of solving that? Vote for that person. Thanks, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a major challenge, is what I understand from our communities, let's say Asia Pacific. It's a major problem is awareness. We have to create more awareness. I'm sure even in Malaysia or Asia Pacific, maybe 60% or even more than that organization, they are not aware about climate change. Even they are not taking preparations, good preparations on climate change, even this kind of food and water security. Even for today's sessions, we all invite different journalists, different academicians, different corporations. We find that still lot of work we have to do, specifically with the small medium enterprise. Many organizations still not doing. Yes, big corporation, they let's say Sunway Group, they are focusing on sustainabilities. They have some sort of preparations, but still there is a big room. We have to do a lot of work. So what is your advice how we can integrated our in between our community, especially the climate change related things, how we can create more awareness in this grassroots level? I want to start from Professor David. Can you unmute, please?
Yes, just my mouse was not fast enough. Well, the thing is, it goes, the basic thing is over starting from kindergarten through school, university, so the educational sector, starting there. And then also not only educating youth or young people, but also trying to get them involved into projects. So it's like make a think tank and then also have some funds, some resources that they can also enable their ideas into real projects. This is I think the best way first to understand what we are doing to the planet, how we can solve our issues, and then to put these ideas into real projects. This would be my idea. And of course, as a voter, you have the right, but most of the time is like behind parties, you have lobbying groups. This is the issue. And they promise you something, they promise you everything in advance of the election, and afterwards it changes everything. It's like we can see it now currently in Germany. We have parliament elections in October, and now COVID-19 is not an issue anymore. Yeah, this is just an example. But really, like my example, the best case is education, doing real projects, and going also out in the world, trying to learn by nature, because this is also one of the cure. And I mean, Asia is a great continent. You have so much diversity, variety. You really can learn a lot. And for me, it was a really scarce to see in KK, in Kota Kinabalu, on the fish market, that you fish all your reef fish there. Yeah, all the coral fish are being taken out, and they are a big part of the diversity. They keep the coral reef clean. Yeah, they keep it healthy. And also, is like if you go to, I don't know, Cambodia, to the Tonle Sap, to see these big fish farms, and the antibiotics going out into Tonle Sap and infecting the water, going into the water, and also the how to say these growth chemicals, to make these estrogens, to make the fish grow faster. They go all in the drinking water. And yeah, of course, Asia, you have a lot of developing nations. And who am I to say learn out of our mistakes? Because we repeat our mistakes all over again in the industrial world. This is really one thing I can give to Asian countries: learn from our mistakes and don't repeat them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith. Yes.
Well, David's right in that what we need to do is learn from our mistakes. The challenge we have from learning from our mistakes is we look at them as point solutions and not as the overall system which they're residing in. An example I can refer to recently is in Texas, we've done a good job of moving away to help with climate change from generating electricity with oil and gas, and a lot more solar and a lot more wind. However, our winter storm knocked the solar offline and knocked our wind offline as well, because we did not develop it as though we're in a cold climate. And so even while you have things like that addressing climate change, it had trickle down effects of not looking at it and the relationships where you're trying to solve it. If I'm trying to solve a food issue, a water issue in Haiti versus trying to solve the same thing in Afghanistan, the issue is to solve the food and water, but the approaches you have to take, the systems you have to build will be very different for those two. You have common problems, such as getting data out into rural areas where a lot of water production tends to be aggregated, where a lot of food production tends to be aggregated, but they're the ones that are more isolated than your major cities. So again, it's looking at it as the broader system problem and trying to bring that systems approach even to growing food, distributing food, harvesting food, water, the transportation systems with those. All of those have to be treated as the ecosystems they are, and not just the individual components, or even in developing nations and others, you will run into many problems that we even run into here every day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Aaron. Unmute, please.
Yeah, so I think it actually, I agree, and I think that it starts being implemented at a individual level of literally, if you have to, printing out flyers and getting the information out. Because a lot of people simply don't realize that there are these emerging problems, especially in my area. Everybody in Texas, everybody likes to have their heads under the sand. Oh, climate change isn't happening. And thankfully, this winter storm, I think, kind of made people realize that this is occurring. But, you know, people just don't realize or aren't willing to accept. So at least for my area on a local level, it would literally almost have to start with small scale Facebook groups and with walking around and handing out flyers and saying, hey, you know, we're going to have a meeting in the pavilion at this time to discuss this issue at a local level, and then coordinating some of the stuff that develops at that grassroots level with more integrated at a higher level, you know, projects. So again, I think a lot of it is just getting the information out, getting it to individuals at the local level, and helping people to understand not only that this is a problem, but just the scope and the scale of the problem, and that there actually are solutions ready pretty much right now. You know, but if the information doesn't get out, they would never know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Rob, there is a question from our audience. Nur Fazrin, greetings from Malaysia. Thank you, Nur Fazrin, for asking your question. What are the strategies that help to prevent the food shortage in developing nations?
Well, the kinds of things that you can use to prevent food shortages is, first, you probably need a decent analytics effort to understand what's causing the food shortage. What causing the food shortage in Chile may be very different than what's causing the food shortage in parts of Asia. So first, you know, these things aren't band-aid problems where the same solution fits all issues. And so the first step is to understand what's the cause of the problem. Is it a lack of arable land? Is it a lack of farmland? Is it a lack of clean water? Is it a distribution problem where you have plenty of potential production. It's just not getting to the people. Is it an economic problem? Can the people not afford the food that's being produced in other areas, and so you can't afford to import it? But you need to highlight what's causing the problem and then prioritize the fixes against the problem, so you can best use your resources. As we mentioned before, to deal with a food problem, particularly a food problem that's being caused by climate change, you can bring farming indoors to protect it. The yields from these industrial farms are incredibly high, and the food quality is equally high. So that can be a solution, but then you have to build that out. I mean, you still have to build the plant and train the people to run it. I think part of one of the things we're just kind of dancing around is, as a race, we're really bad at strategic thinking. We're tactical thinkers by nature, and so we tend to focus on the problem that's in front of us, not the problem that appears to be over the horizon. And for most folks, until you have a food shortage, it's not a problem, and then when you have it, it's the only problem you're dealing with. So it's very binary. It's either something that doesn't get a lot of attention, or it's something that gets all your attention, but by the time it becomes a serious problem, you likely don't have the resources to fix it anymore. And so the thing is perhaps for schools, making an effort to teach people to think strategically and plan against long-term events, so those events don't occur, is important. Plus, a lot of things we're talking about in terms of fixes will benefit generations after ours. Certainly much better than they're going to benefit our generation. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be done, but we have to train people to think about protecting the following generations, because if it's not important, if people are mostly focused on, what's happening next week or tomorrow, and not thinking about what's going to happen in 4 or 5 years, we're never going to put in place the infrastructure we need to deal with some of these problems definitively. These are long-term investments, the major behavioral changes, and the more in trouble we get, the harder it is to find the funding to fix them. Plus, the cost of fixing them goes up over time. Now, we can use technology, and technology advancements can reduce costs, but depending on technology, when you're already out of control, to pull your nuts out of the fire isn't going to work, because when it's too late, it really is too late. It's that Bill Gates isn't going to wave a magic wand and suddenly global warming is going to go away. So we need to teach strategic thinking, teach people to think over the horizon and be willing to make current sacrifices for long-term benefits. And that's not just for global warming. It's really for any industrial effort you're going to put in place. If you're thinking tactically, it's probably going to fail. If you're thinking strategically, you have a much better chance of it succeeding. And dealing with water and food issues is a strategic problem, and it does require strategic thinkers to address it.
Thank you. Mr. Paul, I want to bring another question from audience. It's from Miss Alea. Alea Ahmed, thank you for your question. How can we educate the people to understand the value of proper food and clean water in rural areas?
Well,
Professor Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to, enlarging on what Rob was saying, we need to educate people to be more strategic thinkers, as opposed to just tactical thinking. I mean, I play a lot of chess, and strategy and tactics are two key parts of the game. And if you don't have the strategy, the longer term strategy, then you'll never become a really strong player in chess. I mean, the breakthrough, people naturally gravitate towards the tactics, the short-term maneuvers, both in their life and in a lot of games like chess. And, you need to sit back sometimes. I mean, it's a bit of a difference between sort of knowledge and wisdom, if you like. I mean, to have, wisdom is to sort of think, beyond the present moment, more a bit into the future, and trying to, if you don't think about it, then you can't really direct it. I mean, it's sort of like being reactive versus being proactive. I mean, often, we're just far too reactive. I mean, we don't worry about a food shortage or a food famine or a water shortage until we're right in that situation. And then we have no choice. Our backs are against the wall. We have to do something. We make decisions, and often, when we're under the gun like that, then we make decisions that actually are the wrong decisions or poor decisions. That's why, when we have strategic thinking and we try to anticipate some of these problems and think more longer term, then we can actually make much better plans. We can actually make much better decisions to, make our societies more resilient. I mean, we're talking about making societies more resilient to, and we can't. There's so many things that we cannot predict, right? There's so many things that sort of seem to leap out and surprise us. Whereas if we actually thought a little bit about the longer term, we could actually anticipate many of these things and reduce the surprises so that our response is, much more well thought out, much more rational, much more logical, and then the net result is much better. We get through these problems much better. I mean, the Texas power grid has been, we know it's been shaky for many years, and it was just pushed over the threshold limits by the winter storm, and then it caused grief to huge numbers of people for long periods of time, and then all the people started finger pointing and blaming other people for it, whereas, a little bit of foresight would have allowed, could have prevented it from happening in the first place even. So, we tend to be much too focused on responses, sort of, and with the short-term thinking. Just, we get a crisis, we have to do something about it. We react, right? And it's not necessary that we have to operate in that fashion. So we need to, we need a different mindset. We need to change our thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid. There is one question, Onika Shams. I don't know, other expert panelists also can respond on these questions. How does globalization affect food security?
Sharif, I'll pass that on to other panelists because Paul brought up chess, and the Foundation is designed to build communities through chess. And we are in 4 different African nations because I think the gift of chess is the gift you give a child that lasts a lifetime. It teaches them many life lessons, including strategic thinking, including the ability to sit still and think, which is directly transferable back into the classroom. And I can go on and on. I have elevator pitches and 30-minute pitches, all about the benefits of learning chess. But the main thing is that when the child learns that they can play chess, they think they must be smart. I don't tell them that, but they think it. And their self-confidence grows. And when their self-confidence grows, something like math tables doesn't seem so impossible to them anymore. So what are we doing? We're creating the ability to think. And what do our schools lack? Our 19th century educational systems in the United States, what do they lack is the ability to make the strategical thinking a reality. And they're a little short on creativity as well. And you must be a creative player to play chess well as well. Because you see something that your opponent doesn't see. That's wonderful. And you think, oh my goodness, this is joyful. And so they are learning while they are playing. They think they're on recess, but they're really learning life lessons and the ability to think strategically. And I've been criticized, they need food, they need water, they don't need chess. Well, my foundation helps them establish these chess communities because they bring people together, and those that know how to play teach the others. And this is a wonderful thing. When you see it, it's amazing to watch. And when you see a child who won't look you in the eyes, and then all of a sudden they're going like this, they know the answer to the question. These are wonderful things. But, so I help individually, as an individual, not through the foundation, to supply them with some food, anti-malarial drugs, those types of things. But that is that's the fundamental human need. They have to have food. They have to have water. But then we want to build a community. Start with yourself, then your community. And then who knows where it'll stop. You keep growing out from inside out, not from outside in, inside out. And if I have resources, then they don't have them to start a chess program. Why wouldn't I share what I have with them? I don't understand what's the argument against it. So, you know, I can't solve the food problem in Africa. I can't solve the water problems in Africa, but I can do a little bit, an incremental difference in terms of chess. And so I do that. And I do a little bit on the other side too, but is it a drop in the bucket? Yes, but everybody does a little bit. It's not just a drop in the bucket. If you say, oh, it's too big a problem for me, you're just another brick in the wall, and we have to tear down the walls. So this is what building a community is. There are walls, artificial walls that man has built. Tear them down, be together, be a community, expand that community until you start thinking of the planet as one big community. Not, how are we there yet? No. Can we get there? I don't know. But can we try? Yes. And everyone has that responsibility to try, I think, because the problems that we're facing now are planet-wide. They're global problems. And we're running out of time to address them. We don't want to wait until the ocean is on fire. We already have islands of plastic in the ocean. You know, that's not warning enough? Okay, so we're going to wait until it starts to burn? No, the water doesn't burn, it boils. What we'll be burning are man-made products that we put into the ocean. So these are the things that I want us to address and to keep in mind. And as we go forward, change yourself, change your community, who knows where it'll end. Thanks again, Sharif. Wonderful, wonderful show.
Thank you. Thank you. So anyone want to give response on this question? Professor David Smith? Or yes.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, I actually wanted to respond to this question from the beginning. Well, yes, of course, is we have to stop to, like, I don't know, harvest plums in Argentina, bring them to Asia to be packaged, and then sell them in a supermarket in Europe. This is how globalization affects food security, because the cheapest price wins. Another example is like what is currently ongoing in Africa is like PRC, not PRC, but Chinese ships are like emptying the ocean of fish to produce fish powder to feed the salmon in Norway and Canada. So we have smoked salmon in our supermarket shelves. These kind of production type, they have to stop totally, completely, because we waste resources which are unnecessary. Yeah, this is like how globalization affects our food production. Actually, you can say the supply chain of food. And also another example is Starbucks. I think Starbucks was just producing their food, their sandwiches, everything in the US, and was shipping it all over the world by airplane. And these kind of types of manufacturing, they have to stop. It's like what you can produce locally should be produced locally, of course, in a smart way. There are better ways as at the moment being used. An example is irrigation. If you like water plants, like 70-80% of the water is being condensed immediately. So it's like just 20-30% are going to the plant. And there you have like these, not like to say evaporation effects, but like if you have these small triplets to water the plant, this is way better because you lose less water. Also is like to make plants less heat, make them more heat resistant is another way. It's like here the International Atomic Energy Agency in Cyberstorf is working on these projects to make corn plants more heat resistant. There are a lot of ways to do this. I mean, the best example is wheat, how wheat has been changed genetically to get more crops out of it. The side effect is also you don't know what these genetically changes do to our body. Yeah, this is another thing. But of course, it's like to end it, like I said, produce where it is possible, what is possible there in a smart way, Of course, it doesn't make sense to produce bananas in the UK. This is everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron, and then Professor David. Can you unmute, Mr. Aaron?
Sorry, I just wanted to add in really quick. This I always reference Nestle and the Coca-Cola company and how kind of the part that they play in globalization affecting the stability and the security of our food supplies and water supplies. I don't remember the exact statistics at this moment, I'll be honest with you, but I know they drain a daunting, and I reiterate, a daunting amount of clean drinkable water from mostly developing countries. And again, I don't remember the exact statistics right now, but it's disturbing to see, honestly. And that's why I would like to see them using a lot more of captured rainwater in places where that's applicable and things like that to get their supply, because draining developing nations of their water supply to feed this massive corporate entity is pretty dystopic, if you ask me. And that's really about all I have to offer on that.
Professor David Smith.
Globalization is a trend that is driven by scale of economics. And you have to begin to look at that. Globalization, though, in the food value chain, in the food distribution chain, the security required to protect that's going to get more rigorous as we're going forward. Just like in many industries, we're seeing ransomware attacks for money. You're going to increasingly see this type of ransomware attacks going in dealing with particularly the food portion of globalization. One of the benefits from COVID-19 is that we now see the bad sides of globalization, where before we just mostly saw the good side of globalization. And I believe we're going to see more of a movement going back towards more local production, where in many instances, local production has been abandoned in favor of globalized production. You know, you're going to see the manufacturing, you're going to see it in food production as well. To bring, for example, a lot of the vegetables that I eat in Texas from Brazil during the winter is great to have them here. But the security of moving it through that chain is always a risk factor as you go forward. And increasingly, it's becoming not just a physical security risk, but a cyber security risk as well.
Thank you. Professor Paul.
Yeah, globalization, is wonderful for getting the cheapest price when everything is running smoothly, but it really eliminates or greatly reduces your resilience to tolerate shocks that occur. If you take globalization to the maximum, basically, then it ends up with one huge factory in one part of the world producing widgets, whatever it may be, for the entire world, right? Because the lowest possible price. But then comes along a flood or a hurricane or something like that, and it takes out that factory, and the world no longer has any production capability for this particular widget or device, right? So if you take globalization to the extreme, then it completely eliminates resilience, and the supply chains are completely dependent on one place or one region, and they can be completely knocked out for long periods of time. And also you lose a lot of the knowledge right? Like other places no longer know how to produce this product. It all goes to one place. So, it reduces resiliency completely, and it makes the world reliant on, very, very uh, very, very weak supply chains. And we did see that in COVID, for example. Many countries had no ability to produce their own masks, for example. Or, many countries, they just had to wait, and try to compete on the world market to get vaccines from just a few different companies.
Mhm.
Right? And now they're scrambling to, maybe produce their own vaccines, etc. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of these weaknesses, and the just-in-time idea, where when you make a product with many different components, you have to order, whether it be a car or anything else, you're reliant on these just-in-time supply chains, where you get a part delivered to your factory, and it's in all your cars within a few days, right? And if that supply chain is disrupted, you can no longer, every car is just sitting idle on the line, waiting for this one part to be put in before any other parts can be put in. So globalization, it completely eliminates any resilience that we have in our society. And with the abrupt climate system change and all these unexpected events, I say in quotes unexpected, because they seem to pop out of nowhere, and we haven't had any strategic thinking to anticipate them, or any systems thinking to anticipate them, then they become huge surprises. And it's like throwing a spanner into the gears. The gears, the machinery halts. And yeah, it's just it's sort of the complete opposite to resilience is globalization. So in order to get resilience back, we need the localization, right? And part of this is a lot of globalization occurred because of the difference in labor costs in different countries. Developing countries had much greater pools of people who were willing to work at much lower prices, and that's why the factories went there. Because labor is a big expense, of course, for any manufacturing process. So it's like a pendulum. It just swings way too far, and then it swings back. So but it has eliminated a lot of resilience to tolerate shocks in the world. Globalization. So.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sharif, are you back?
We have to
Okay.
go for, yeah, we have to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from Mr. David Mai, then Professor Smith, David Smith, then Mr. Aaron, then Professor Paul, and finally Mr. James Heath.
Well, thanks a lot. To sum it up, like I said, we need smart production systems. Of course, the ocean is one of the solutions to produce algae in this way, which can be a great food source. Another thing is, of course, like not to ship goods from A to B to C and then sell them in D. This is about, how to say food. About water, waste less water, of course. The same also counts for food. Use water wisely. Also use it wisely in a production system. Like, of course, all components, all production systems need water. Also, is like for food production, water needs to be used wisely. And a big solution, of course, for drinking water is desalination, because there is just a certain amount, I don't know, 2-3% of drinkable water, and it can't be a solution that we pump out these resources, because this means a big damage to the current ecosystem. and also is like to have a solution towards this, to make a more resilient society, of course, is education. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
My closing remark is that particularly people in the regions around the world need to be open to innovation in areas of food and water as you go forward. You know, as we heard earlier, growing plants in a vertical environment indoors is one. Actually, planting farms underwater and growing crops in that is another innovation that we're seeing happen. Looking at different ways to use water, not just taking salt water and removing the salt, but how I can produce water from air, how I can produce water as other products going forward. And that innovation is what's going to help lift all the ships for everyone when it comes to food and water. Our next big challenges that we're going to have to deal with are in these two areas. You know, many of the scenarios show the next place we're going to have a war will be over these two, food and water again as well. So you have to begin to look at ways to be innovative to solve it. We have to look at these as systems problems. Now, I really want to stress it, that, as you know, we live in an age of systems, and all these systems have to be taken into consideration when we solve a complex problem like this. Food and water, the distribution, the production of, and relating it back to our communities is a complex problem. And we need to view it as a complex problem and solve it as one. But the innovation and the collaboration of those public-private partnerships will help us drive to that solution path much faster than us trying to do this isolated one piece at a time.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Aaron.
Yeah, so just a quick point here. As these systems do become more and more automated, the development of technologies like quantum encryption is going to be critical to ensuring their cybersecurity in the future. We had an oil pipeline get hacked here in the US, and it caused pandemonium in the states that were affected. So things like quantum encryption are really going to help with that. But in conclusion, I urge that young entrepreneurs, any entrepreneur, anybody who understands that this problem does exist, to please start working on technologies to combat this on your level and to make them marketably viable, and to actually take it upon yourself to walk this walk moving forward, because not only is this going to help save our planet, but I'm sure for a lot of the so-called early investors and early contributors, it's also going to line their pockets. So there's motivate, not that these things should be commoditized, but they are right now, and coming up with these solutions is going to ease some of the strain. So I urge moving forward that if you have anything to contribute towards this, start collaborating with people, start trying to develop these ideas and these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Sharif, again for hosting these sessions, and thanks to all the speakers and listeners. So, yeah, we have these. None of these problems are going to be solved in a day. We need to start chipping away at them, and we need to change the way that we do things so that the solution, so that these problems become less of a factor. With abrupt climate system change, we don't have the luxury of time, because our planet is very rapidly changing, and we're losing, for example, the biomass, the plants on or the plants specifically on land, absorb huge amounts of carbon right now at the atmosphere, from the atmosphere, as do the oceans. And as the temperature continues to rapidly climb, there's less and less absorption of CO2 in the land, on the land and in the oceans, and thus there'll be more in the atmosphere, and that will accelerate the rate of warming. So we don't have time. We're on a time's up. I mean, we have to take strong measures to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, to reduce the emissions to burn less fossil fuels and put less carbon in the atmosphere, and also look at ways to to try to buy us time to do these things. So yeah, we've trashed the planet, and we're facing a lot of consequences. Just one anecdote: the particles that are put into the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning has killed about kills about 8.7 million people per year, which is about 3 times, not quite 3 times, the amount of deaths from the coronavirus. So every year, year in, year out, many people are dying around the planet from fossil fuel burning, putting little particles in the atmosphere, which then we're breathing, getting lodged into our lungs, and so on. And we've come to accept these losses in our society, right? They don't make headline news as the virus does, and yet the death rates are much higher. So we need to properly assess the risks in order to deal with the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsit.
Thank you, Sharif, for having me on as a guest in another of your series of wonderful shows. I do think we want to focus on the appropriate technology in your locality, and think locally, but also we have to think systematically, because some of these problems are systemic and they need to systematic thinking. So teach chess in your schools, because it'll teach systematic thinking. And one of the things of systematic thinking teaches you is redundancies, because whatever's one thing you have that is working, it may fail. So you must have a redundancy. You must have a backup system. I can remember back in the dark ages when I was taught computer programming, they told you to save your work and just save it early and often, because in those days, systems crashed. And if you spent 4 hours writing something and it crashed and it was gone, it was a horrible feeling. So you saved it. So that when the system did crash, because the system inevitably would crash, then you could start over where you left off. And this was the kind of thinking that we need in everything that we do. Appropriate technology locally, and connectivity to other resources so that you can have backups. And to do this kind of thing, keep the backups connected. And we're talking about technologies, and we're also talking about people. We're talking about food. We're also talking about water. So if you have a system, that may work for a while, but it will inevitably fail. So have a backup system. So you have to think of these things as a systemic issues and think systematically about how you solve them. And when you do, you'll find that when you have a failure, and a failure will happen, you will have a backup that kicks in until you can restore the primary service. So these are the ways you think about these things. These are the way you build systems that work, that even when the inevitable failure occurs, you recover. And so once we start thinking like that, I think that a lot of our problems will go not away, but will be manageable. And that's all we want, is to be able to manage our problems, because we will have problems and they will change over time. So what worked 20 years ago may not work today, and what we can come up with today may not work 20 years from now. So we have to be adaptable. We have to be ready to change. And whatever's wrong with the human race, and there are many things wrong with the human race, they can be solved by what's right with the human race, if we work together to solve them collectively, and we collaborate with one another. If we don't think about this as my world, my problem, we think about this as our world, our problem. And thanks again, Sharif. This is a wonderful show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I have few declarations because 29th and 30th May, we have our summit on futuristic leadership. So I request all of our panelists and the futuristic leader, please join in our summit. We are trying to engage with 300 different corporations from around the world because already we are finishing our 280 episodes. So share our content as much as possible with your classroom, with your policymaker, with your corporations. We are very much open, World Talent Economy Forum, for collaborations. Besides that, we need our more volunteers. We are developing our scientific committee because we need to solve many local problem with the help of global communities. So we are working hard. So those who want to join in our team, you can join. We are open for that, and we are like going for our fundraising option because 40% of the population around the world, they live in Asia Pacific. So we have to develop different projects based on our discussions and other things. So hopefully your support will help us to grow more. And thank you everyone. So I request everyone share our content as much as possible. I know many of the developing nations, even many good news is countries' prime minister office, they regularly communicate with us. Many ministries, many corporations, many universities, they are communicate with us, and they are regularly observing our shows. And this is the positive things because we get energy from our audience. So thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. Hopefully we can make more fruitful discussions through World Talent Economy Forum. Need more of your contribution. Thank you, Professor David, Mr. Aaron, Professor Paul, Mr. James Heath, and Mr. David Mai for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.